Hello, my name's Will Sloan.
And my name's Justin the Clue.
And you know that already.
If you listen to this, you know who we are.
Yeah, why did I even bother introducing myself?
Unless they bought the Criterion Blu-ray and this commentary is playing on it.
Right, we're going to sell it to them shortly after. But welcome to one of our favorite films, Edgar G. Ulmer's Detour from 1945.
The film that every one of our listeners has told us they were introduced through us, which is crazy to me.
And, this is just another effort to get people to watch it.
Yeah, exactly.
So please watch the movie first before you listen to this. I mean, I guess that should go without saying.
You're going to do one of those, or we're going to do all the commentary cliches? Yeah. At what point will we start just narrating what's happening on screen?
I would say at the 35-minute mark.
Yeah.
But anyway, Edgar G. Ulmer, a touchstone director for the Important Cinema Club podcast, and I think maybe we should start by reading the most important piece of writing ever written about him. And don't worry, it's not going to take too long. It's just a paragraph.
It's from the transcript of our episode.
It's from Andrew Sarris's The American Cinema, the book that really solidified the auteur theory for American audiences. And he wrote, "The French call him un cinéaste maudit, and directors certainly don't come any more maudit. But yes, Virginia, there is an Edgar G. Ulmer, and he is no longer one of the private jokes shared by auteur critics, but one of the minor glories of the cinema. Here is a career, more subterranean than most, which be signature of a genuine artist. Strictly speaking, most of Ulmer's films are of interest only to unthinking audiences or specialists in mise-en-scène. Yet anyone who loves the cinema must be moved by Daughter of Dr. Jekyll, a film with a scenario so atrocious that it takes 40 minutes to establish that the daughter of Dr. Jekyll is indeed the daughter of Dr. Jekyll. Ulmer's camera never falters even when his characters disintegrate. As the executor of the Murnau estate, he is faithful to his trust, and when his material is less impossible, his reflexes are still sharp for the meaningful challenges of The Black Cat, Bluebeard, Ruthless, Murder is My Beat, Detour, and The Naked Dawn. That a personal style could emerge from the lowest depths of Poverty Row is a tribute to a director without alibis."
Was this written at the time where Edgar G. Ulmer was blowing up his history, in the interview that he did with Peter Bogdanovich?
I think it was written shortly before the interview with Peter Bogdanovich, but the French critics had already discovered Ulmer. It was in the 1950s, particularly when they were writing about him, after Ulmer had completed the bulk of his canonical works, and when he was moving on to his even more subterranean films.
Yeah.
And Francois Truffaut, in particular, called Ulmer his favorite American director, tied with Sam Fuller.
That's insane.
Which was
a contrarian's opinion.
Okay, now we've got a great shot coming up in a second.
Probably the film's most famous shot.
Yeah.
I think it does a few kind of amazing things that I watched a few Ulmer films before we recorded this commentary, and that light boxing of people's eyes is something that he goes back to over and over again. And I think that when you're talking about expressionist film noir style, that's one that pops into somebody's mind instantly. And then the kind of destruction of the physical space in something that is, for all intents and purposes, fairly serious in this shot that we're watching right now is what's amazing about it. Just wait for it, and boom. Light boxing the eyes.
Love it. And you can even tell that there's just a guy with a flashlight off screen, but it looks so good.
And then the panning down to the famous giant coffee cup, which they obviously switched out and put in. This reminds me of other famous giant object shots, like the key in Joseph Kahn's Torque. There's a giant badge in Looky Luke. And I don't know if he wants people to know that it's giant. It's obvious when it happens on screen, but the reason people use giant objects like that is to keep them in focus. Most of the time when you would do something like this is because you just want to have the illusion that this thing is in focus, when in reality you need a giant object to do it.
Here's another kind of Ulmer trademark, the fluid camera work, the moving from one thing to another. Definitely something he inherited from Murnau. Supposedly, actually, I think this is true. Edgar G. Ulmer made up a lot of stuff about his early life, but he apparently did work with F.W. Murnau on his film Sunrise.
And he claimed at the time that he invented the moving camera shot in The Last Laugh, which was a silent Murnau film.
Yeah, that's probably not true. Ulmer also claimed later in life that he worked on M and Metropolis and that he didn't get along with Fritz Lang. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he did work in some capacity.
But what he claims that he designed all the sets in Metropolis, that's just not true.
He also apparently worked in Max Reinhardt's famous theater company in, 1920s Weimar, Berlin. And, his greatest achievement, I guess, from that era of his career was working on People on Sunday, which is a film, a city symphony film that has an all-star dream team of collaborators, including Billy Wilder, Siodomak, the guy who made King Kong.
Yeah, that's right.
Fred Zinnemann, and somebody else who I'm forgetting.
Didn't Shuftan shoot it as well?
Yeah,
Eugene Shuftan, who would go on to shoot a bunch of really famous films, including Paul Newman's The Hustler.
Nice. All these people who had much more successful, in some ways, careers than Edgar G. Ulmer.
And why do you think that is, that Ulmer had such a struggle to get the success that, like, that list of names that you just mentioned are filled with people that went on to make classics and just to be big in the industry? Do you think it boils down to what ended up happening with him at Universal Pictures?
Yeah, so Edgar G. Ulmer, after his time in Berlin, he came to Hollywood. He claims he made a bunch of two-reel westerns. None of them have surfaced. He did, in Canada, make an STD scare film.
That was paid for by the government. Is it called, what is it?
Damaged Lives.
Yep.
And it's pretty good as far as they go. It's
on the STD hygiene scale, it's
like,
good.
He's made a lot of movies in disreputable genres that are like the best example of that genre, but so what?
Like you wouldn't want to actually explore that in the first place.
Like his nudist camp movie, The Naked Venus, has lots of beautiful images in it, but like it's still not that great.
It's a nudist camp movie.
Oh man, God, that shot where he frames it right there as he's going past the chairs, good.
The beginning of Detour is like a kind of catalog of all the stuff that people take away from it, like them walking through the streets in a second, and it's just some backlot with fog all over it, or the expressionist touch of like at one point she's singing and you see all the shadows of the musician projected behind her.
Sometimes you can take Ulmer for granted until you start to watch like some of the films made by his contemporaries who were working in the same conditions at the time. Like that shot we just saw where it's framed, him in the profile in front of her. It's a more, even that, which is not a particularly memorable shot, is much more visually interesting than just the standard static shots that most of his colleagues were doing.
Even though that when you start to explore Ulmer's career as a filmmaker, there's definitely a law of diminishing returns, with Detour being the peak of that kind of purity of what people fall in love with.
Oh man, look at this. Okay, so he's filming New York in a shitty studio in LA. He has no resources, so what does he do? He puts a couple of street lamps, a couple of storefronts, and just a lot of fog. And it works for two purposes. It hides the fact that he doesn't have New York.
And he could have just shot the back lot and just been like, oh, this is New York, people won't notice.
Yeah, but it hides that, but it also suggests a New York of memory. A New York that just exists in Tom Neal's mind here. And, you compare it to a filmmaker like, it's unfair to compare Ulmer to Ed Wood, but, Ed Wood in Plan 9 from Outer Space also used a lot of smoke to hide the deficiencies of his set, but he used the smoke much less imaginatively. He just used it indiscriminately, like, okay, here's a bunch of smoke.
Well, there's something kind of lovable about the idea of Edgar G. Ulmer. When people talk about him and people fall in love with him, I think there is that link to Ed Wood of this is the guy that for most of his career liked to say that he had nothing and that he had to make all these things with like no resources. This film, he's working for the Producers Releasing Corporation, the top tier Poverty Row studio, and that like the film itself is famous for almost every review once it was starting to be reevaluated would say like, oh, it was shot for $20,000, it was done in 6 days, and there's something kind of endearing about that when the reality is that is not actually true.
I think Peter Bogdanovich, when he interviewed Ulmer, he said something along the lines of what Ulmer could do with almost nothing is a inspiration for all directors, including me. Now, Ulmer claimed that he shot this movie, yeah, as you said, for 20,000 or 15,000, and he shot it in 6 days. Researchers since then, including his biographer Noah Eisenberg, have determined that it actually cost a little bit over $100,000, and it was shot in 14 days.
Which is $1.4 million in 2018 money. And that's not like a lot of money, but for what is often described as something that, like, for a company that would churn things out, that is a fair amount. It was actually a pretty high up on PRC's kind of importance list, because what I was shot and edited, and in that time, another film that starred Anne Savage was able to be released before Detour was put out, because I think that PRC, from the research that has been done, they actually thought that Detour was something good, and they wanted to push it as something good.
And Ulmer, by this point, was sort of PRC's prestige director, which, again, isn't saying much.
Yeah, at this point, he had made Strange Illusion, and I believe Bluebeard, or maybe Strange Illusion came after.
Yeah. But the three of those were made back to back. But anyway, getting a little bit back to Ulmer's life story. So after he made Damaged Lives, he got a big chance to direct a big studio film. Not the most prestigious big studio film, but a big studio film nonetheless. And it was The Black Cat with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi. And it was a box office success, and he brought much of his own style to it, with his beautiful modernist sets and with his use of classical music, and with that wonderful scene in The Black Cat where, like, the camera just, like, tracks through the basement of Boris Karloff's mansion while he's narrating.
And it was a film that famously had a lot of fights with the censors, because it was very violent. And when we say very violent, for that time, like, implied kind of necrophilia. And
it ends with Lugosi saying that he's going to skin Karloff alive, which you don't actually see on screen, but you hear the blood-curdling screams from it and everything. And I don't know, like, I think The Black Cat's a movie that keeps getting better for me every time I see it, because, you know, it's very much this post-war movie where you get a sense of Europe is this, you know, continent that's just, you know, like, his big modernist house is built literally on top of the decay and the death of this huge conflict.
And it's also a film that it doesn't have what you usually associate with Universal horror pictures at that time, like the obvious monster or something like that. It's really dealing with kind of the echoes of problems that, you know, Germany was dealing with at the time.
Yeah.
And it's all kind of summed up by Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi, who give career best performances in the film.
So it was a box office success for Universal. Unfortunately, Ulmer ran off with the daughter of the nephew of the studio head.
Uh-oh.
And for that, he seemed, I guess, blackballed from Hollywood. I love this. The
stock
shots.
footage.
Yeah. It's you know, there are some continuity errors coming up here. I mean, you know, it's not really, who cares about
IMDb goof.
I know, I'm not going to do that, but the main one is you can see him hitchhiking, but he's on the wrong side of the road from where he would be hitchhiking if he were going in that direction. So that's the kind of, you know, stuff that...
It's really a representation of his state of mind. He really doesn't know what's going on.
That's right, he's an unreliable narrator.
Exactly.
But anyway, who cares? I don't give a shit about continuity errors, but that's the sort... Anytime you read about Detour, people will always say it's loaded with continuity errors.
Well,
like this
even
or that.
in, like, Roger Ebert's review, that was technically a praise of it, where he went like, this movie's Poverty Row, shot in 6 days, filled with technical errors and a ham-handed narrative, starring a man who can only pout and a woman who can only sneer, should have faded from sight soon after its release in 1945, and yet it lives on, a creepy embodiment of the guilty soul of film noir. No one who has seen it has easily forgotten it. I mean, that's a position that I feel like a lot of people, when they see a movie like this, take, which is like, I'm better than it, but I see that it has value.
Yeah.
Which is like, come on, Ebert. This movie, it's so imaginative in the way that it's set up, and that its acting fits perfectly for the, you know, world that exists. I mean, we should, you know, talk a little bit about Tom Neal, especially because his life is horrifying.
He's got a great life story. By the way, I love that map that we saw.
How else would we know where he was going?
Yeah. This is the shot where he's, I think, on the wrong side of the road. Anyway.
Yeah, and you can see that the car kind of blows by, right? It could have been a one-sided road.
Yeah, anyway, who gives a shit? But yeah, Tom Neal, former boxer turned actor who's had a real tabloid scandal sheet of a life.
So he was an actor that basically, he was like a journeyman. He was never a star or anything like that.
And mostly in B pictures. I think he was in The Devil Bat with Bela Lugosi.
Oh, a Will Slung favorite.
No, sorry, he was in Bowery at Midnight. Excuse me.
Okay. Was that a Poverty Row picture?
Yeah, that was a Monogram film.
And he was involved in a relationship, an on and off one, with a party girl named Barbara Payton.
Who wrote a great memoir, by the way, called I Am Not Ashamed.
Really?
Detailing her life of addiction and mental health crises.
Wait, when did she write it? Because considering how her life turned out.
Yeah, I think she wrote it towards the end of her life.
And what ended up happening is that Tom Neal killed her.
No, he didn't kill her, but he killed somebody later. Tom Neal got in a fight with the man she was having an affair with, and he beat him up, and
Francois Tone,
and he broke his cheekbones and gave him a concussion. So that was bad. That's a sample of the Tom Neal Barbara Payton relationship. But later, after Tom Neal's acting career dwindled, I believe he married another woman. He was working as a landscape painter at this time, and in 1965 he shot her.
Yeah, in the back of the head.
And it was involuntary manslaughter, as it was ruled, because it was an accidental shot. But I don't know, he served 6 years for it.
Yeah, and when he got out, he lived for, I believe, around only 8 months before dying of essentially alcoholism.
So, this movie is, whether it's Tom Neal or whether it's Ulmer, it's loaded with people who, things just didn't quite go right for them. I mean, I think part of what's special about this movie is that we kind of project something onto it. We project something about Ulmer's own life story.
Yeah.
Like, this guy here, Tom Neal, he was going in one direction until fate stuck out its foot and tripped him,
Do you think that there's something attractive about the story that it's telling? Because the most interesting thing about Detour is that it's a film that seems to have 2 acts and then it ends. Yeah. So people love that shit.
Yeah.
And that it's either that surprise that people kind of respond to and the kind of failure of a main character. Because, he is a character who is making incorrect decisions, but those situations that he's put into are almost beyond his control. There's no real moral quandary right from the get-go that sets him on a path of failure.
Yeah.
Other than something bad happens, he's like, oh shit, I have to change, I have to figure out a way to get out of this, and instead I'll do the worst possible thing.
And luck at every step of the way.
Bad. Do you think that, to take this position, that Edgar G. Ulmer is projecting himself on the Tom Neal character, who at the beginning of the film is portrayed as a very talented, artistic person who has to make these tough life choices?
Frankly, yes. I do think that. I know that Ulmer said that this was his favorite movie that he made, and it's also, frankly, the best movie he made, and it can't be a coincidence that this is the one that has the most passion in it. It can't be a coincidence that this is the one that his heart and soul is in.
And he did stay with his wife for quite a while, I believe. Until his death?
Yeah, Ulmer and his wife stayed married until his death, and she was basically, in his life, sort of like what Alma Reville was to Alfred Hitchcock. She was his right-hand woman. She was his script supervisor. She treated him much better than he treated her. Towards the end of his life, in fact, he had a child out of wedlock.
Oof, yeah.
And she stuck with him. But, whether he was traveling overseas to make a pirate movie in Sicily, or whether he was making The Cavern and he was literally fainting on set because he had
oxygen tank on set while they were filming it, a film that its star John Saxon is not impressed by.
Yeah, but whether he was making a nudist camp film, every step of the way she was with him.
That's crazy. Maybe she always, he may have been just an awesome, charming guy, but the fact that they did go through such a sacrifice and a crazy life event to be together maybe had value for her, and for him, not so much.
Yeah, and his wife, Shirley Ulmer is her name. She lived, I think, into the new millennium.
Yeah, she was interviewed on DVD releases that came out. That Ulmer Archive, a box set that was put out by David Callett, has some interviews with her.
And, long after Ulmer's death in the early 70s, she was working hard to keep his name alive and keep his films preserved. And now their daughter, Ariane Ulmer, is continuing that fight. She has an archive of her father's work at, I think, the UCLA archives.
Well, I think that Edgar G. Ulmer, out of all the filmmakers I can think of that has as big a cult as he does. I mean, it's not huge, but most like cinephiles, if you mention his name, they go, "Oh yeah, I know who that is." Detour. It's one that has been almost unpreserved in the sense as technology has been kind of evolving. The thing with Detour is that it is in the public domain, so essentially anybody can release it.
Yeah, these are orphan films, and aside from maybe Detour and the Black Cat, which are kind of genre films, so they attract people who are interested in those genres in particular. But a lot of them, his filmography is just so dispersed, and it was made by so many people, and so many of the films are kind of only of interest to you if you're already interested in Ulmer.
I think that we talked about this on the podcast episode that we did for Ulmer, but like it needs someone like a Criterion to take it and to put it within its correct context and then release it. I mean, again, like David Callett tried to do that with his Edgar G. Ulmer archive set, but even that box set is like on the early kind of, steps of digitally remastering. Like, those films are in pretty rough shape still, but they're as good as they were going to look at that period in time. Like, even something like Detour, like, there's no proper release of it. And, I mean, there's a specific reason for that, which is Wade Williams owns the negative of that. Do you have more information about him?
Well, Wade Williams is a film entrepreneur. I believe he lives in the South. Who in the 70s, 80s, and 90s kind of made his name by buying up the rights to all of these old science fiction and horror films, like B or Z level horror and science fiction films, claiming that he had the rights to them. Some of them he did have the rights to, but he was also a collector and he had all these prints. And he had money, so he could kind of swing his stick around legally to people who would challenge his copyright. But he claimed for many years to own the copyright on all of Ed Wood's movies, for instance.
Oh, wow.
So, like, Disney, when they made the Ed Wood movie, had to give him a certain amount of money, which he built a house with.
And that, I mean, Detour is one of his most famous kind of acquisitions because he supposedly owns the negative of it.
I'm not sure if that's true. When you watch the DVD release that he put out, I mean, it's a pretty good print, but it's still a print.
Yeah, that's the image release, I believe.
Yeah, it's pretty scratchy looking.
And I think that the best anecdote related to him is the fact that he remade Detour in 1992 in an attempt to, I believe, keep the copyright on it.
Yeah.
And the way that he went about it, calling it like... he put his name above the title on Detour, and he also cast Tom Neal's son,
Tom Neal Jr. And I'm not
look at this shot. That's so
fucking
good.
Beautiful. Ulmer, the master. But yeah, the Detour remake, which I have not seen.
Shocking.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
why would you though?
Well, apparently it's just kind of like the Psycho remake, where it's in color, but it's like practically a shot-for-shot remake, and it proves, once and for all that genius is between the lines somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just copy the same movie. I think maybe Wade Williams thinks he has the copyright on it because of the Martin Goldsmith novel that it's based on.
That's right, because he did buy the rights to that.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's the reason that it hasn't been released. Or maybe it's like Night of the Living Dead, is that someone like Criterion needs to step up and go, all right, we're going to do this, and we're going to make it our own, and then we'll release it. Because it is in the public domain. So there's this idea that everybody already has it if they wanted to watch it, so why would a company go out of their way to release it?
Yeah. It's tragic.
But I don't think that's true. I think that there's still value in it. On screen here, the guy that plays the driver that picked up Tom is a man named Edmund McDonald. That's all I got for you. He died in 1949. He acted in a bunch of B movies. Kind of, go for it character actor, but that's pretty much it.
Coming up here is one of several, frankly, unbelievable plot twists in the film where he opens the door and the guy falls out and his head hits a rock and he dies. And then even on the narration, anytime one of these unbelievable plot twists happens, Tom Neal has to say, listen, I know what you're thinking. This sounds ridiculous.
Do you think that because he's an unreliable narrator, like there's another story going on here where he did murder all these people for specific reasons?
Could be. I'm inclined to think not, because the whole point of the movie is it's just like bad luck.
Yeah, and especially the movie at the end when the cops pull up and pick him up.
Yeah.
I was reading that Edgar G. Ulmer actually did that because, you know, the Hays Code at the time, you needed to have criminals punished if they did crimes. So even though that in this movie they're all basically accidental, so there's this idea that he gets picked up by the police. Even though in the narration he actually says one day the cops are going to come and pick me up and it'll be bad luck. So there's this kind of assumption that he's just going to go on through his life worrying that this is going to happen until it eventually does.
A minute later.
Yeah. I love the kind of set here where it's obviously just in a studio somewhere with the car, they're raining water down on him and there's just blackness beyond it. There's always something attractive with the expressionist background. Anytime I see like a painted background on anything or just like a color or blackness, it just makes me a little bit more excited.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just that idea that there is a evident visual creativity, even if it's to hide something cheap, that, you know, it's cool.
You know, I saw Plan 9 from Outer Space on 35mm film recently, if you could believe that. But I noticed, you know, with that kind of size and clarity that you can actually see the shadow of people against the cemetery's black backdrop. Something I'd never seen before.
So you're trying to say that there's value in the public domain Plan 9 from Outer Space DVD?
Well, like, I don't know. I just think Plan 9 from Outer Space is another example of like the tactile beauty of you know, shitty production values.
Do you kind of go towards things that would be described as like expressionist or like German expressionist? Does that have value for you?
Well, I love that style, sure. You know, it's funny. I'm probably more interested in Edgar G. Ulmer than I am in F.W. Murnau, which is an indefensible position. I mean, I love Murnau. He's one of the great filmmakers of all time.
But Edgar G. Ulmer is like doing this all like with nothing, right?
Yeah.
And Murnau was always supported by a studio system.
Yeah, Murnau had endless resources, and this guy was like doing it in spite of the system.
Exactly.
Nobody was encouraging him to create German expressionist fucking Poverty Row movies. Even I recently saw one of his last films, Beyond the Time Barrier. Which I thought was great.
Really?
Yeah, I really liked it. And it's just, you know, it was shot clearly on some warehouse somewhere. I love that shot. Tom Neal's just got such a great face.
Yeah.
But it was clearly shot in some warehouse, but he decided to do it with this, like, triangle visual motif. Everything on this distant planet is a triangle. Triangles and heavy shadows. And I thought it was almost just a heroic example of creating something out of nothing.
Because the thing is that Edgar G. Ulmer is making movies for audiences that don't really care at the end of the day, right? Like, if he just put something that had murder or nudity, and he didn't need all these crazy tracking moves or anything like that, they would just accept it. While other people, like the other famous Poverty Row director we talked about on our Poverty Row episode,
Frank Visbar.
Yeah, or what's the name of the guy? One Shot Bodine.
Oh, William Bodine, of course. Yes.
Like, he didn't give any shits about what he was making. Like, he just put it out there.
Yeah, you told the story. William Bodine has made something like 300 movies, including most of the Bowery Boys films and a lot of the Charlie Chan films. And you were saying that he was shooting a Bowery Boys movie, and one of the executives said, "Oh, you gotta hurry up. We gotta get this out." He says, "People aren't gonna watch this, are they?"
And I think that's the difference between someone like Bodine and Ulmer, is that Ulmer, you feel like in his best movies that he's making something that he wants to be appreciated. That there's a belief that at one point someone will see something like Detour and realize that there's, you know, value in it, while it actually didn't really happen to the level that, you know, would have been good enough, because he did pass away in
1972, I think.
Yeah, and I think that the real kind of reevaluation of his work, it was happening through the Cage Cinema and Peter Bogdanovich.
But it certainly didn't help him very much.
No, it didn't. Like, it didn't lead to anything, or like he didn't go on like a circuit tour or anything with his films.
There is something beautiful about just the idea of art for art's sake in his filmography. Like, if you're making films at PRC, even if you're their prestige director, you're working with the guarantee that nobody's going to take this seriously.
No, it's just not going to happen.
So, if you are part of the 2% of Poverty Row directors who, given that knowledge, tried to make something great, that's very powerful and beautiful.
Yeah, it is. Especially in a time that, like, when these films were coming out, they were playing in movie theaters, and what was there TV syndication at this point? I think it was probably just starting.
Yeah, I don't think so yet. I think most of these sort of B movies started to get syndicated in the early to mid 50s.
Okay, so when he made Detour, there wasn't even the assumption that it would live on, like, on the airwaves. This was going to come out and was probably going to just go away unless somebody rediscovered it.
I think maybe we should talk a little bit about Poverty Row. Anybody who's listened to our award-winning podcast episode on the
Award-winning?
on the topic will know. But, Poverty Row were a series of, or a string of, bargain basement movie studios on the wrong side of town in Hollywood who specialized in low-budget movies that would play on the second half of double features, and they would be distributed to theaters on a flat rental basis.
That means that no matter how well they did, they would only receive that flat fee.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter if they made something that people wanted to see and sold a lot of tickets, other than the fact that if they did, then they could sell other stuff on a flat rate.
And you were already in profit basically before you started rolling the camera. A slim profit, but you were in profit, and you didn't really want to do anything to rock the boat.
So if you were a filmmaker that would go over schedule or over budget, that was frowned upon because what difference does it make to make something better?
People's Releasing Corporation, supposedly they never spent more than $100,000 on a film, although I guess they made an exception with this one. It ran from 1939 to 1947, and their films include such classics as The Devil Bat with Bela Lugosi, Hitler's Madman, which was later picked up by MGM, one of the few times that ever happened.
Directed by Douglas Sirk.
Yes, that's
who
correct.
Supposedly is falsely credited with directing The Strange Woman, an Ulmer picture, of co-directing some scenes. It says on IMDb, Douglas Sirk uncredited, but most Ulmer biographers have looked into it and there's no evidence of that. They don't know where it came from, but it's something that keeps living on.
Ulmer, I think, was involved in Hitler's Madman in some capacity. I think he did a pass on the script or something like that.
Or he just said that.
Yeah, who knows? Anyway, it pops up in his filmography every now and then. But yeah, PRC, what can you say about them? He was the king of the lot, Ulmer. He, in the years after making The Black Cat, he mostly worked on ethnic productions, which was a real come down for him after working at Universal.
He did a bunch of African-American musicals. He did some Jewish films as well, I believe.
Yiddish movies. Cossacks in Exile was, I think, a Ukrainian film that he did. And eventually, in the early 40s, he got picked up to work at PRC, which was at least a studio, although pretty much the worst studio that you could get at.
Yeah, because, Poverty Row wasn't just PRC, which you would think was the P in their name, but there was also, like, Monogram Pictures. There was
Republic Pictures, which was kind of like the best of the Poverty Row studios. They had the biggest budget, and they had, I guess, more prestige. They did, for example, Orson Welles' Macbeth.
Yeah, there was an attempt with Republic to always go beyond what they were defined by getting people usually on the rocks and hoping that they would make something a little bit more important than the usual films that they cranked out.
And they also had Roy Rogers, who was very popular.
And we're about to be introduced here to Anne Savage, the other star of Detour, coming in at about the 2-minute mark.
Yeah, incredible.
Which
the heart and soul of the film, by the way.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, she's incredible. Like, the minute she shows up, it's like, the lights coming on in a pinball machine.
And is she an actress that you've watched other of her films? Like, is there
I've
anything
seen
worth...
one other of her films.
Okay.
And that's My Winnipeg by Guy Madden.
That's right, because Anne Savage basically had one of those careers that lasted like 8 to 10 years, mostly working in Poverty Row, playing the femme fatale in noir films, and then she kind of, took a break, and by break I mean retired.
Yeah, I mean, she was a leading lady. She started in the studio system, went to Poverty Row, went to television, but just someone who never really made it. And yeah, retired until the 70s and 80s when film societies started showing this movie, and she would come to screenings and do Q&As.
She was the only person still alive that could do that.
Yeah, and Guy Madden, towards the very end of her life in 2008, gave her a measure of a comeback by casting her as his mother in his film My Winnipeg. And I mean, at that point, Anne Savage was well into her 80s. Not, didn't quite have all of her acting chops anymore, I think it's fair to say, but she was really used more as a...
Yeah, a signifier, or like a symbol in My Winnipeg. I mean, what a way to go out, though, in like a big, critically acclaimed Guy Madden film.
God, there's some stunning dialogue in the scene. Boy, she looked like she got thrown off the crummiest freight train in the world. But there's a beauty about her. A beauty that was almost homely because it was so real. So fucking good. And look at her.
I mean, Anne Savage, like, all of her features are kind of pointed, right? Whether
Yeah.
it be her nose or her eyebrows, there's something, like, menacing about her, and the film kind of, whoa, she's just a turn right there.
Look at that.
That the film kind of uses that perfectly. Like, she's someone that's already been set up in the picture, having kind of, like, fought up against the other guy that died and scratched him.
You know, there are some femme fatales like, I don't know, Lauren Bacall or someone like that who, you know, have maybe a slightly huskier voice and so, or have a kind of large screen presence, so they seem a little bit threatening. But I mean, this is a whole other level. Like, I mean, the way he describes her is very true. Like, she has a pungent sexuality to her, but it's not the kind of pungent sexuality that I think most like male audience members would gravitate towards.
Yeah, she'll stab him in his sleep, pretty much.
Do you think she's supposed to be a prostitute in this movie?
I mean, she could be. The assumption is that, like, at a time like this, when an actress would appear in a movie and she'd be on her own,
Hitchhiking?
yeah, that most people would assume that she's a prostitute because that's the implications of the time. How could a woman survive on her own? I mean, she's definitely someone who's been abused throughout her life, and I think that's fairly obvious. Like, there's even the indication that the driver who got killed tried to make a move on her and she didn't want it, and that's why she fought back.
That's right, because he has scratches on him, literal scratches.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, she is portrayed as such a monster in the scenario that, like, the protagonist has to kind of fight against, even though the scenario that she comes into is one of his own basically devising.
Grail Marcus wrote of her performance, "Her voice is shrill, harsh, punishing, a complete explosion of every notion of what a leading lady in a feature film was supposed to sound like." And Guy Madden said, "It's a role as much fearily attacked as performed."
She did go on to write a biography about her life, which I haven't read, but I hear is very good.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
Because the people with her kind of career always have the most interesting backstories when they write it out, because they don't give any crap about what people will perceive them as.
Yeah,
so.
the career didn't work out.
No, so it doesn't really
nothing
matter.
to lose.
If people are going into Ulmer, like, what are the movies that you recommend that are not Detour or like the other famous one, like the Black Cat?
Oh, God. Well, you know, I mean, there are a lot of Ulmer films that I like. I mean, Beyond the Time Barrier is an example of that.
But you would tell people to stay away from stuff like The Transparent Man, which are his late career kind of sci-fi pictures that he made to, I assume, to pay the bills.
The Amazing Transparent Man is quite bad. It was, I mean, it's just not much of a movie.
But it's one that's always in syndication, so it's one that's very closely associated with him.
It's in the public domain. It was on Mystery Science Theater 3000. You know, when he started working at PRC, maybe, you know, half of the movies he made at PRC are kind of only interesting if you're like
An Ulmer head?
a complete Ulmer head and you see the camera just glided a little bit. It's the master at work.
Yeah.
Or hey, there's a shadow, or there's a visible ceiling in Girls in Chains. But you know, I think part of the fun of Ulmer study is like if you're gonna become an Ulmer head, part of what you've got to do is like leave your sanity at the door. Like, you've got to enjoy the game of projecting stuff onto some of these movies and you know, panning for gold in these movies.
Well, I mean, like, I watched A Strange Woman, which I think that you were like, that one's an okay one. And I actually really liked it.
That's the one with Hedy Lamarr, right?
Yeah, and that was his biggest budget picture alongside Ruthless, which is his Citizen Kane. And I mean Citizen Kane in structure, not necessarily importance. Detour is his Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
And I actually really liked it. And, I mean, something when you talk about Ulmer is, would he have all the same stylistic tics if he had a budget to work with? Like, that's the question, right?
Well, I think he would have had some of them. I mean, look at the Black Cat.
I mean, look at Strange Woman, and it has all the stuff that he's kind of playing around with in his lower budgeted pictures, but just more developed. Like, the film is a morally complex story about a woman who, is she a sociopath? Is she something else? She's having crisis of conscience, and she's playing men against each other, but at the same time, she's a woman in a society that has no respect for women. women, and she has no agency for herself. And the demand to get that agency forces her to do kind of villainous things. And at the same time, it has all the gliding camera work with Ulmer, tons of moments with like expressionist lighting where a character will just be, light box just through the eyes. And I think that it actually kind of gives hope of, maybe Ulmer could have led to different things. But no, wasn't going to happen.
We had a bit of a theory when we were doing our Ulmer episode that maybe if he were able to work at the studio system, he would have turned into Michael Curtiz.
Yeah, like a journeyman who's just really good at kind of churning stuff out.
But I mean, I think the whole meaning of his career, the whole reason his career was interesting is because he wasn't allowed to work at that level. And he was beating against the current in these impoverished conditions.
Yeah, and working in so many genres. Like you mentioned, he made a pirate picture. He ended up in Italy for a while, co-directing pictures with Italian filmmakers.
Yeah, there was a Hannibal the Conqueror film, which I haven't seen.
And I think that kind of his creative input on those films is fairly minimal. Oftentimes, they would attach Ulmer with another filmmaker so that they would be international co-productions so they could receive more money.
So, to answer your question, though, like, what are the Ulmer films that I would recommend to people? I think Bluebeard is one. It's been a while since I've seen Bluebeard. I wonder how it would play to somebody who's not a complete Ulmer head. But, I mean, I think it's pretty damn good for a Poverty Row movie.
It is.
It's got all of his beautiful, visual signatures.
I actually watched a bit of it yesterday, and it definitely has him fully formed in the story that he's telling. John Barrymore stars in it as the titular Bluebeard, who is also like a puppeteer, which adds like a different dimension to the story that's being told.
Yeah.
And I think that the big unfortunate thing about Bluebeard is that there's no like
Good
decent-looking version of it. Even the version that I watched had terrible sound, and it looked like the print was about to like jump out of the projector, even though I was watching it like on a YouTube copy.
Yeah, I mean, it makes the image look even darker, which is, probably for the best, that expressionist quality.
But, like, Bluebeard also has a world that's more fully formed that I really like, even though that it's very kind of claustrophobic, where it's like a period piece, supposedly taking place in Paris, where Bluebeard is murdering people, and there's all these characters kind of running around, and there's that just still an energy to it that, like, Ulmer brings to it. Because, like, in his best films, he knows he has nothing to work with, so he might as well just keep it moving. Like, Bluebeard is, I believe, 62 minutes.
Yeah, that's right.
And Detour is only 70 minutes, which is a perfect time. It doesn't need to be any longer, even though that it was supposedly cut down from its original version.
Murder Is My Beat is pretty fun.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
It's a 50s B noir. It doesn't have as much visual imagination as a movie like Detour, but it's just like a good pulpy noir movie. Moves really quickly.
And The Naked Dawn is a rare color film that Edgar G. Ulmer made, a Western.
And this is the one that the French critics really liked.
It's fine. Like, I didn't really see that much in it.
I like it. It was hard for me to, though, determine the Ulmer authorial signature in it. Maybe I would have to see it again.
Didn't Truffaut say something like you can see the person in the movie or something?
He called it a small gift from Hollywood, and Truffaut went so over the top. He said something like, "You can tell that the man who made this film is a good man, a kind man," something like that. Oh man! So Anne Savage is great in this scene where she's now that she's kidnapped Al Robbins, she's now coming on to him.
Yeah, because, she has him in the situation, and if she's going to control him in one way, she might as well control him in every way.
There's probably like a cycle of violence thing here. I mean, she clearly associates sex with power.
Do you think like that the film noir femme fatale cycle is all kind of an outgrowing of the fear that men had of women being in a position of power?
Now that you mention it, probably, yeah, why not?
Because I'm just thinking of like, I wish I had like a history book of dates, because film noir is often something that's associated with like the post-World War II years, and that in that time, the women, while the men were away, got an agency that they hadn't been able to have before.
Oh, that's a really interesting theory, yeah.
And then that when they came back, I'm just pulling it out all of my ass now.
It's interesting, though. I like it.
That all these film noirs would often put men as kind of rubes that are trapped in a situation they can't control, and as women that are the ones dominating over them. And then at the end, what's funny about film noirs is that they're often kind of nihilistic, and that the men do lose at the end, that there's nothing that they can do to get out of that situation.
Well, we can talk a little bit about film noir, just
to pad out the running time.
Yeah, all the cliches about it, right?
Yeah.
Like the fact that the atomic bomb had dropped and the concentration camps were found, and so film noir captured the morally ambiguous spirit of the age.
Yeah.
And we didn't know who the heroes were and who the villains were,
Even though
et cetera.
World War II was defined as a war that there was an obvious good guy and bad guy, but yeah, let's forget that fact.
Yeah.
And that the attraction to film noir is something that, is something that I have. And I was asking myself, like, what do I like about it? Like, there's film noir societies, film noir groups. When you're talking about, like, classical films, film noir is one of that, like, bubbles at the top.
It's very accessible. I mean, if you see on Twitter, lots of, lay filmgoers take part in, like, Noirvember hashtag.
And you think that's because it is a kind of... I mean, genre is kind of a misnomer because film noir is a style in of itself.
Well, I think we associate classic movies with, like, the Hays Code and with a certain prudish morality. And, film noir was fighting against that to some extent. I mean, it had more ambiguous heroes. It had more violence. They were more sexually suggestive.
And then speaking of World War II, the leaders of the film noir movement were often people that came from Germany to work on films because film noir was the budget genre that you could work in. So all these big filmmakers like Fritz Lang or stuff like that, well, they may have been working with studios, but these were considered like B pictures. But it gave them a flexibility to tell stories that weren't specifically in that studio, like Happy Ending, Louis B. Mayer. It just was supposed to make people feel good.
And they could do some interesting things with the look of them as well.
Just because the emotions are defined by expressionist touches.
Anne Savage is so great in this scene too. There's like, she lets a little bit of vulnerability in, like she, despite the circumstance they're in, like she really does just kind of want to connect with somebody in some way.
I feel like the complexity of her character is good because the viewer is stuck in a weird situation where this guy is obviously trapped and he's being controlled by this woman, and there's this idea of like, oh, she just let him go. He could just go back to where he needs to go, back into the arms of his own girlfriend. But at the same time, she is, not the evil mastermind here that like that you could just hate. There's a sympathy there, and that like the way that Al kind of betrays her at times, or kind of doesn't want to have any relations with her, and she's hurt. You kind of feel it.
And she's been so fucked over by life, like she doesn't really know how to relate to,
exactly.
to people.
And like this whole sheen that she's trying to put through is just another stopgap to hopefully lead to something that's better. And obviously it doesn't.
This is unrelated, but those flashbacks that we saw early in the film in New York, something that I always think about when I see them is how kind of not nostalgic they are in a way. Like, you think that they're going to be this beautiful flashback to this,
happy,
lost paradise
time
where he had his girl, but there's something just kind of uneasy about them, and there's a desperation to the life in them.
Well, you feel like he wasn't the success that he thought he was going to be, right? And that's what this journey is all about, is that he's going towards something better and new, and if these things hadn't happened, he would have had those things.
And there's something so unreal about his girlfriend in the film. We see her in the context of the flashback. We see her in that one dream sequence where, the shadows of the orchestra behind her, and we see a couple of shots of her answering the phone in just a disembodied room.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, she seems to exist somewhere outside the space of the story.
Like, she's not specifically something real, but something that he just wants to attain. Like, the dream you have of the perfect girlfriend that's waiting for you at the end of the road.
Yeah. Here's one of those vulnerable moments right here.
Yeah, she's just pouring her heart out, and nope, not interested.
What a face.
Yeah, look at that face.
It's just amazing.
And that hair, that like the weird, what is that called? Like the
I don't know. You're asking the wrong guy.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you are sporting that hairstyle right now, Will. So I thought you knew what it was going to be called. And there's also like that vulnerability and that kind of sex appeal in the fact that she's just wearing like a bathrobe. Like she's feeling comfortable enough with this stranger that she has under her control that she doesn't have to put on airs for him or like appear as something more powerful than she perceives herself to be. The ill-fated phone making its Chekhov's gun appearance here.
Yeah, foreshadowing another highly unbelievable plot twist that's going to happen.
Hey, listen, this is just a story that's being told, right? So maybe it didn't happen this way.
So, looking at Ulmer's filmography, yeah, I would say, the first 5 or 6 of the movies he made at PRC. My Son, the Hero. I've seen that one.
Have you?
Yeah, and not very... Like, this is when you're in the absolute,
dregs.
Yeah,
not to be confused with My Father the Hero, the classic Jet Li picture directed by Corey Young.
Or My Father the Hero, the classic Gerard Depardieu comedy.
What? I've never heard of that one.
Yeah. My Father the Hero, kind of a terrible B comedy. Girls in Chains, just a standard woman in prison film. Isle of Forgotten Sins, kind of fun. I don't want to make any great claims for it. It's tropical island adventure with some deep sea diving, and it's got John Carradine in it.
Ooh, I love myself some John Carradine.
1 or 2 neat Ulmer touches. Jive Junction, haven't seen, but yeah, Bluebeard, Strange Illusion, The Strange Woman, Detour. That's the streak right there after that. And clearly Ulmer, when he got to the studio, he had to prove his mettle a little bit. He had to prove that he could make these more standard movies before he could experiment.
Yeah, it's like any job, right? You can't just come in and go, I'm a genius, look at all the stuff I can do.
And, Ulmer would often say in interviews that despite the budgetary constraints he was under, which were considerable, he still had a lot of freedom at PRC. More than he might have had, in fact, at a Hollywood studio.
I mean, you bring things on time and on budget, and no one's going to say anything.
He, in his interview with Peter Bogdanovich, said he didn't want to be ground up in the Hollywood hash machine. And I don't know if I believe him. I think
if a studio came knocking, I think Edgar G. Ulmer would be the first one to jump through that door.
Yeah, but that's what he said. And I mean, I believe that, perhaps he might have been difficult to work with at a studio.
Do you think that that's one of the reasons the studio didn't hire him after he made all these Poverty Row pictures? Because if a guy can prove himself to be, just a journeyman from the get-go who can make a film and make it on time, on budget. I know I'm saying this a lot. Or is it that the Black Cat just followed him forever? The fact that there was so many difficulties with censorship, and the fact that he ran off with the nephew of the studio head's wife.
Yeah, I think there are no easy answers to this question. I think there are some directors who were able to kind of rise out of Poverty Row. I'm having trouble thinking of examples.
Douglas Sirk.
Yeah, Douglas Sirk's an example. Phil Carlson, maybe.
Yeah.
Certain directors who later worked at a studio. But, for the most part, Poverty Row was filmmakers from the silent era who had fallen on hard times, like William Bodine. Or it was people who just worked in Poverty Row and they got typecast there.
Yeah, and once you're in, you can't escape.
Yeah, and I think that might have been a bit of the case with Ulmer. Also, Ulmer might not have just been very business savvy. He might not have had the right representatives. He might not have been circulating in the right communities. He had this big shot after Detour where he made these 2 relatively high-budget movies back-to-back.
Yeah, the aforementioned The Strange Woman and Ruthless. Now, The Strange Woman, if I'm not mistaken, he got that job because its star, Hedy Lamarr, is the one that wanted him to work on it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so. They're both Hungarian emigres, I think.
Yeah.
Right? Well, he's not. He was from the current Czech Republic.
Yeah.
But, they were both, Eastern European people.
And, I don't know what went on with that film because, it is a successful picture in of itself.
I think he and Hedy Lamarr had a contentious relationship together. They may have also had an affair, too.
That sounds about right. That's Edgar G. Ulmer, you hound dog.
And I think when that suggestion was posed to Shirley Ulmer in an interview, she said something along the lines of, even if it did happen, it couldn't have lasted very long. So I think that suggests to me that they did have an affair.
And then he made Ruthless afterwards.
Yeah, kind of a mini Citizen Kane. And then there was Carnegie Hall, which is a relatively lavish production.
Which is 2+ hours, isn't it, according to its IMDb?
Yeah,
I haven't seen it.
It's mostly just an excuse for classical musical numbers, shot, photographed in a very, artful Edgar G. Ulmer style. And it's got kind of a love story tacked onto it. But that's another relatively high gloss production that he did. And then after that, his career, when he was loaned out to do The Strange Woman, he was loaned out by PRC, who pocketed, I think, most of his fee for that movie and didn't didn't allow him to be paid what he thought he was deserved. So he thought, fuck that, I'm striking out on my own.
Oh, really? So he wasn't going to go back to PRC after that. He's
Yeah.
like, I'm just going to do my own thing, raise it independent, and hit that drive-in circuit that's popping up.
And also PRC disbanded in 1949, so it wouldn't even have been an option.
I mean, like, in the later periods of Ulmer's career, he was in a weird place, right? Where, like, the studio system is at it's strong, but it doesn't have that monopoly that it had in the 40s and 50s.
He made a number of films that were later picked up by studios. Like, I think The Naked Dawn was picked up by a studio. Certain of his films were picked up by, like, MGM just to be B movies, like The Amazing Transparent Man or something like that. But yeah.
That was Ulmer's career.
Yeah, that was Ulmer's career. Well, some of his films in the 50s I think are quite interesting. I mean, the fact that they didn't come strictly from a Poverty Row Studios assembly line is kind of interesting. So there are more flavors of his career, I think, in the 50s. I think the quality of his work isn't as consistent, but there are just more kind of things he's doing. There's The Man from Planet X, which is, I think, like, pretty beloved among Ulmer fans.
That's one that was in syndication for so long that it feels like it just kind of nostalgically attached itself to people like Joe Dante, where the iconic image of this Martian, who looks super cool, and these fog-shrouded sets.
Well, he looks a little bit like Charlie McCarthy, like a ventriloquist dummy in a diving helmet.
And the fact that the movie is actually fairly dull and nothing happens on it.
I have mixed feelings about The Man from Planet X. I feel about it sort of how I feel like a movie like Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires.
Super dull. Looks great though.
Yes, where it's kind of like if you can slow yourself down to the point where you can just enjoy,
like your heartbeat,
your
you're
heartbeat.
going into a comatose state watching the
and
movie.
you can just enjoy being in this atmosphere, and having it sort of like letting it wash over you, because The Man from Planet X is where Ulmer took that fog thing to its extreme.
Yes, I mean, how much further could he take it from there?
It's all fog. It's set in like rural Scotland, and it's just fog, 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 fog. Very artfully photographed. Not a single character that you can really hang your hat on.
It almost feels like Ulmer, like, he wouldn't jump into like a monster or space picture like some of the directors, like the guy who made The Saucer Man. I forget what his name is, or It Came from Outer Space. Like, that director, like, he just made like monster pictures. Like, he knew what he was doing, he did them well. While Ulmer looks like he was always trying to do something a little bit different. Like, even like the Man from Planet X, like, that is a monster picture, but not exactly in the way you'd expect it to be, right? It delivers the thrills, but not those specific monster picture thrills.
The Naked Venus, what can you say about it? It's got its charms, but The Naked Venus, his nudist camp film, which he did under a pseudonym, has this courtroom set that's one of the worst courtroom sets.
Really?
It's just like a bunch of lawn chairs, basically. That's supposed to be corn. I think there's a map up on the wall or something.
I mean, that gives it some validity, obviously.
Yeah, but he did Murderers My Beat that decade. Daughter of Dr. Jekyll.
Which we watched together.
Yeah, we did, and I remember we put it on, and the first thing you said was, "Oh, love it, big spooky house."
Yeah.
That's all I want.
And then 40 minutes in, I'm like, oh boy.
Daughter of Dr. Jekyll is a real extreme test case for Ulmer Auteuris, because it has very, very little to recommend, but it's also a movie that I think is more fondly remembered than some better films he made. Like, I think more people probably watch Doctor of Dr. Jekyll than they watch The Strange Woman, just because it's a
monster picture. Like, it has those kind of attributes that when these packages were sold into syndication to TV and these monster kids saw them, like Dr. Jekyll, I know what that is. So I think that's maybe the thing that Ulmer never kind of exploited, the fact that he should make a film called like Frankenstein's Revenge or something like that.
Yeah.
Then he would probably made more pictures instead of, westerns. Like, as we mentioned, he went to Italy and he made stuff like Hannibal, or he also made stuff like Beyond the Time Barrier.
But between all these movies are all the movies that didn't get made. He was constantly negotiating with producers. Maybe we've got a deal here. There's a great biography of Ulmer, a A Filmmaker at the Margins by Noah Eisenberg, where he had, complete access to Ulmer's archives, including his correspondence. And there were so many heartbreaking letters that Ulmer
Really?
wrote to his wife, being like, "This is the break we've been waiting for. It looks like a studio is going to finally take me on." And then, no, he was off in Italy making Pirates of Capri.
Yeah.
Which is a fun movie, by the way. I recommend that one, too.
Have you ever seen The Perjurer from 1959?
No, I have not.
Huh. I'm just looking at the cover right now, and it looks really exciting. I'm glad people could tune into this commentary for the movies we'll watch after this is done.
The Cavern is pretty good. That's the one he made with John Saxon and Larry Hagman and a couple of others.
And that's one that, it feels like it should have more of a cult than it does, but never got a proper release. It's
the version I saw is Pan and Scan.
Yeah.
It's a CinemaScope movie, too. What an atrocity.
Yeah, I think Fox or someone, owns the rights to that, because I was actually speaking to someone and asking, why hasn't this been released yet? It's some studio that has it and thinks, there's no value in putting this out.
Oh, come on. All the films or someone has to get on their case.
Some Edgar G. Ulmer completist. You feel like the people like his autobiographer, I'm sure, they try to do it. And David Khaled, he did it, and then no one really cared. And it went out of print.
We care.
And it doesn't matter. Yeah, we care. We're the only audience for those movies.
We're trying. We're trying to spread the gospel of Ulmer. But, as the film is winding down here, maybe I'll ask some questions about what you think of Ulmer.
Sure.
How worthwhile do you think Ulmer's study is?
I think it's absolutely worthwhile. I think that Ulmer is one of those filmmakers that, as a director myself, I see his movies and I go, I want to make movies like this. And I should take a step back. And I don't mean that in a kind of oh, well, it looks so easy, anybody could do it. Mm-hmm. It's a look at what he had available to him and look how compelling he could make those movies using stylistic tricks or stuff in that regard. And I think that's really inspiring to me. I think that when people should approach his films, that's usually the first place they go to. The way that we talked about how the fact that he was so low budget is what people find really attractive to him, about him. But at the same time, I think that remastering and making the movies look as good as they could will also give them a different kind of feel to people watching them, one that these films have unfortunately never really gotten a chance to have, except for stuff like Ruthless, which was recently released by Kino, I believe.
All the films put it out, yeah.
But no commentary. Come on, guys.
I'll do it for free.
Yeah, there you go. If Olive Film people are listening right here, they could release, what is those Olive Film, what is the collection where they re-release films?
Their signature series or something like that, yeah.
Where they get groups like me and you to rebuy their Blu-rays again.
Listen, folks, Ruthless with a commentary by me and Justin for $35 SRP.
Yeah.
Money in the bank.
Yeah, just make it a double bill with one of his lesser loved pictures, and there's value right there. That's the thing that it's that'll be the name of the box set. Edgar G. Ulmer, there's value in this.
But, for me, anytime I start watching an Edgar G. Ulmer movie, I fall into an Edgar G. Ulmer rabbit hole where I'll start I'll watch one that's really great, and then I'll be really interested in exploring the obscurities. It's oh man, let's get Saint Benny the Dip and watch it right fucking now. And then and
you kind of get and then knocked down a little bit.
Yeah, and then eventually I get a stomach ache and I feel okay, that's enough Ulmer for now. But there are certain filmmakers who pose a challenge to you, Robert Bresson, where every single film's a masterpiece, is one thing, but Edgar G. Ulmer, where you have to look really hard in some of these movies to find him, that's a challenge, and yet I can't stop watching them.
But that's why
it's a mystery to solve.
That looking for it is the important thing, right? When someone tells you that a filmmaker's film is lost, and you haven't seen half of their filmography, you'll become obsessed with that lost film. You're I need to see this. This sounds great.
Yeah.
Not realizing that it's you probably lost for a reason, and this belief in that Edgar G. Ulmer that there's more there, and there is, but that belief is what drives you to keep finding these films. Maybe you'll be the one to see something in this that wasn't there before. But
also because he's not somebody who had all the resources and was able to just express himself really clearly. Getting a picture of this man who was an artist of an extremely beleaguered kind, working in these barriers. It's the truth of him as a man, as an artist, is dispersed, at unlikely or surprising moments across this vast filmography.
Well, there's something so important about a man like him who, had so much difficulty making his films and using the resources that he had. He could have just given up and like opened a business somewhere or done something else. But like he couldn't do that, and he made films until he straight up died with an oxygen tank in his hands. We just came to the murder sequence. I remember when I watched it for the first time, I went, "What the hell?" Like it just took me so aback. Do you remember the first time you watched Detour?
Yeah, I watched it on a 12-inch TV monitor in my dorm room in second year university, and I liked it very much instantly. And the years, I've probably seen it 7 or 8 times since then.
12-inch monitor.
Yeah.
Wow, that is such a black and white. No, color.
it was color, but
back in the 40s when we were in university.
What was great was when I would watch CinemaScope movies on that TV, because it would literally just be like a tiny little strip. You might as well have watched it on YouTube. It would just be a tiny strip of. I watched Polanski's The Fearless Vampire Killers on my 12-inch TV.
This shot is one that like always grabs me when I watch it, like the looking around the room and things going in and out of focus, just putting you in the state of mind, and like you think it's a point of view shot and then it's not because it pulls back around to him.
Well, it kind of captures something like, oh my god, I've really fucked up now, and like the camera just like
trying almost to escape, and at the same time taking in the environment around it, trying to find like, all right, is there a way that I can spin this some other way?
And it's like time has stopped in this moment.
And like right here, he's just in the same situation he was before, which is that there's someone else. In this case, he's straight up murdered.
Yeah, it's also kind of like that shot in Psycho. After he kills Janet in the shower, and the camera just sort of drifts through the.
Were you surprised when you watched the film and it like ended 5 minutes after this? Because I remember that I expected some other like denouement to happen.
I don't know if I was that surprised. I can't quite remember I think my reaction more than anything was just kind of surprised that there was that tacked on ending where he gets arrested at the very end.
Yeah.
Oh man, look at this. The Ulmer, the king. This is that beautiful Ulmer touch right here.
The thing about filmmaking now is that people, when they shoot digitally, they shoot what's called a log or flat profile, where it basically gives you control of adding shadows and stuff like that to the film. But you can tell when people add shadows. And here it's just like a director making a conscious decision of how he wants it to look. When he gets it to time it and stuff like that and edit it, there's no way around it. And that's what's beautiful about it.
Yeah, this is hard work.
It is.
So when this movie was first released, it got pretty good reviews in the trade papers. Hollywood Reporter called it the best film to ever come out of PRC.
And I think they're absolutely true. It played in like a big cinemas, didn't it? I remember reading that it played in like a 2,000-seater one, and it had like a pre-show with like music and stuff like that. And then Detour played, and it did well.
Yeah, that said, after the theatrical run disappeared from view, until the French critics rediscovered it, and then the kind of new Hollywood cinema of the 70s, those filmmakers like Bogdanovich discovered it again.
Are all like PRC films considered in the public domain?
I think most of them are.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, most of them, frankly, people just don't want to watch.
So it doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, because it's I mean, that's the thing that I think has crippled Detour as well as helped it, is the fact that it is in the public domain. Because when you look for something and you see it just pop up on something like YouTube, it instantly goes, oh, well, if it was that good, it wouldn't just be available in these million copies.
I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I mean, would Night of the Living Dead, would It's a Wonderful Life, would Reefer Madness, I don't know, like any of those movies, would they be as well-known if they weren't in the public domain?
But I think they're more well-known than Detour. And that Detour is like the odd stepchild of the kind of public domain movies. That's why we're doing this commentary, because we're bringing it back.
Yeah, crime doesn't pay.
Is that the moral of the lesson? So remember, guys, if you commit a murder or what looks like a murder, turn yourself in.
Folks, my guilt will haunt me for the rest of my life. I know they'll constantly be coming for it. Oh, there they are.
The
got me.
end.
Anyway, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much for listening.